Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'em365.com, recruiting analyst and director and all the other things he does with the co-hosting of the Bearcast and more. Grayson, I got to tell you, we were in New Orleans last week, and I don't know if we've even asked you about this. I don't think so because we didn't have you. But the Ashton Hawkins news, when that came down, I was like, I didn't know he was asking for another year. How critical for a position where they have some depth, but they lost some experience, how critical is him coming back? Is he coming back?
It's a huge storyline, and it was one of those things when Baylor kind of opened the transfer portal process. We saw them go out and get Kobe Prentice from Alabama, saw them go get Cole Wilson from Texas State, but it was clear that they still kind of had more work to do. They were targeting some other guys. A&M's Noah Thomas was a name that popped up. There were a few others as well who Baylor was looking at, and at the end of the day, they were able to get this extra year because of that new JUCO ruling due to the Diego Pavia case there at Vanderbilt. It basically is a blanket rule that allows JUCO guys to have essentially an extra year and an opportunity to go, make NIL money or whatnot. But this ended up being a huge storyline because it was still a position of need for Baylor, and it was something they were going to have to address if they didn't get Ashtyn Hawkins back. And so, as time progressed, as the spring semester started, there became more rumblings that this was a possibility. And, for Baylor to get a guy like this back, I mean, now you turn around and look at it and go, wow, look at what they're returning as pass catchers. When you see Josh Cameron, Ashtyn Hawkins, and Michael Trigg, you got three guys who were, probably your top three pass catchers last year. So you're really, they're really in a good place now. I think when you talk about a guy who's been in an air raid scheme for a long time and has been coached by Jake Spavital for a long time, you're having a guy that's going to come in and you know exactly what you're going to get from him at the position. I also think his versatility to play outside is really key in all of this as well, just because Kobe Prentice hasn't really shown that he can do that. He hasn't really gotten the opportunities to do it. But I think getting a guy in that can play outside. We've seen Cole Wilson play outside at Texas State a lot. And then, of course, Kobe Prentice. Now you have more options for guys at that outside receiver position. Throw in Jaden Porter as well. But it's mainly for me, I think it gives them a safe floor. It gives them more cohesiveness in the offense. And it gives you a guy that, frankly, in some of their biggest moments, he really came through. And I know the LSU game, his touchdown, his second touchdown didn't count. But he really looked good in that game and really showed out and really played well. And I think he's a guy that they feel very comfortable with, are going to be able to rely on. And I think his, again, consistency and that relationship he has with Stuart Robertson on the football field is going to help take this offense to maybe even another level.
Yeah, and Grayson, I don't think it's any secret that wide receiver for a couple years was the hardest position to fill up with talent for Baylor. They just were kind of whiffing on it for a little bit. So to have a veteran back in the fold, a couple of transfers that you like, and allow some of the young guys to find their role a little bit easier as opposed to a couple years ago where it's like, all right, well, next guy's up, and none of them were ready.
Right. And, Paul, you look at the class breakdown. They don't have a single junior who's a scholarship guy on the depth chart, and they have one sophomore. They have four seniors, and then they have five freshmen or redshirt freshmen. There's just a huge gap in there, which kind of makes me think there might be a chance that they still take a transfer wide receiver that maybe has, 2 years or 3 years left, just because there's just this huge gap between all these freshmen and then all these seniors, and there's not much in between. I just think there's still some holes there when it comes to building out, the future of the roster. But I think they've done a really nice job. And the 2025 recruiting class is really good. And I think you're going to see the 2026 recruiting class at the wide receiver position be potentially the best Baylor has had in a really long time. They're in a great position with some really, really good players at the wide receiver position at the moment.
Grayson, we're going to do a bit of a dive on the schedule here in a little bit, but I know it came out last week. Did you guys have Grayson on last week?
No.
Okay, so you didn't talk about it much. Not like a full breakdown am I asking for here, but just what were your kind of initial thoughts? Because it's one thing to have a team coming back and on paper you go, oh, well, this team should win 7, 8, 9 games. It's another thing when you actually see what path they have to travel, even though there's a lot of question marks there. So what jumped off the page to you, if anything, about the 2025 schedule release?
I mean, the good news is we kind of already knew what the first two games were going to look like for Baylor. The first three games, really, because also Stanford in there. So, Baylor's got some big tests. And honestly, I mean, you look through some of the biggest games in the Big 12, Baylor probably has two of the top five non-conference games in the conference this year. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Baylor to perform, and the Big 12 really needs them to perform. And going up against an Auburn team and an Auburn program that I think is craving getting back to winning. They spent some money as well to do that. Went out, got Jackson Arnold. They're trying to get better, and that's a program that's really been pretty mediocre since 2019. But it's still an SEC program. It's a chance for Baylor to make a statement, and then of course at SMU, a team that was just in the college football playoff a year ago. So we kind of knew what was going on there. But then you look at kind of the meat of the conference schedule, which was released, and I think your first Big 12 game going up against the team that won the Big 12 is really interesting. So Baylor's first, three of their first four games are going to be really tough challenges. Of course, they got to go to TCU this year, which we already knew was going to happen. But I think the biggest thing that kind of stands out to me when you look at it is you look at the first half of their schedule, and it is an absolute gauntlet. I mean, you got some really, really tough games and some really tough challenges, and we're going to find out pretty quickly, whether Baylor is a Big 12 title contender, a college football playoff contender, or, maybe even a top 10 type team in the country. I mean, if they get through that unscathed, I think there's a real case to be made there. But then you go to the back half of the schedule, their final five games, and I just think it sets up really well for them to finish the season strong. I mean, you're talking about five teams that really struggled a year ago. When you look at Cincinnati, UCF, Utah, Arizona, and Houston, you get three of those games at home. I mean, that was really the bottom half of the conference last year by and large. And so you look at kind of how the preseason polls will probably be projected. A lot of these teams, probably four of these five teams, will probably be picked outside the top 10 teams in the Big 12. So again, Baylor's got a great chance to finish strong. Obviously, as we saw last year, schedules can be a little deceiving because we thought the second half of the schedule last year was going to be really tough and the beginning would be much easier. That's not really how it ended up playing out. But as far as going into this season, that's kind of my expectation. And Baylor's got really tough first 7 games and then a very nice opportunity to finish strong with their last 5 games.
So you mentioned the possibility of the wide receiver and yet another one in the portal. I don't think you could have enough of them, and you can't have enough of anything. But if you said by the time spring drills wrap up and we get into the late spring, what positions must they fill that have not already been filled by what they've been able to do since the season ended?
Protect your online privacy with NordVPN. Browse securely, access content from anywhere, and keep your data safe with military-grade encryption. Whether at home or on the go, NordVPN ensures your digital freedom. Stay secure. Download NordVPN today at nordvpn.com. That's NORDVPN.com.
Right. So going into the summer after spring ball, I think they're going to have a really good idea of kind of what they did through the transfer portal in the spring. And so I think there's a lot that goes into that, right? Because you're going to have to figure out, is the edge position addressed enough with Amarian Winston, bringing in Kamarian Morgan, with bringing in Matthew Fobbs-White? Like, are you good enough there? Because if you're not, then I think that's a position that needs to be addressed. As of right now, I would say it's a position that needs to be addressed just because we don't really know what they're going to get from those guys. And that's why evaluations are so important going on into spring ball. Other positions I'm looking at, right tackle. Baylor elected to not go get a right tackle in the transfer portal, which likely means they're going to ride with Caden Siraki, who played a lot last year and has played a lot so far during his early career at Baylor. I think they're going to give him a shot. And we know they returned 4 of the 5 guys. That position is the lone position where they lost Campbell Barrington. If Caden Siraki shows up and plays really well, then maybe they don't have to look at that position. But that's one that I'm looking at. I mentioned wide receiver. Maybe that's kind of a possible type thing if they would just want to kind of increase their numbers. Some of the other positions, I still think safety is an area that I would look at. Just bringing in another guy there could potentially help, whether it's a star or boundary. I just think bringing in another guy, maybe even field safety if they find the right guy, would make a lot of sense. I could see them taking another defensive lineman, even though I think if guys live up to their potential, it's not necessarily a necessity but definitely an area they could be looking at. So those are the main ones. But again, I think this all comes down to evaluation, right? How do these guys improve in the spring? What do you see from them? How good are they? And then you kind of go from there with the scholarships you have remaining and kind of divvy those out of positions that you feel like they're the weakest at.
Grayson, basketball, Scott Drew and company lose to Houston back on Monday. I don't think that came really as a surprise, but it's been very up and down, this roller coaster ride of the 2025 season for them. West Virginia coming up tomorrow at home and hosting Arizona. Big Monday, pretty big couple games here, but how do you feel as we start to get into this final stretch of college basketball's regular season?
I feel very uneasy right now. I just think this team has some clear, glaring weaknesses, especially once they lost Josh O. I mean, they were already so thin at the center and really forward position in general. And then you looked at how they played against Houston and how they played against UCF without him, and they just went ultra small. I mean, it's not like they brought in another center off their bench, kind of out of nowhere. They just rolled with the guys that have been playing and, of course, got Langston Love back, which gives them a jolt defensively and offensively. But he's not going to replace Josh O from a rim protection, rebounding, and size standpoint. So this team's really going to have to outscore people. That's kind of how I feel about it at this point. I think they're going to have games where they hemorrhage points and where they just give up a ton of rebounds. I think they'll also have games where they're just really tough to stop and they take advantage of some of the mismatches that they're going to have out there with their four-guard lineup. I think if you look at their schedule, it's manageable. I mean, West Virginia, Colorado, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, TCU, those are all super winnable games. And honestly, Baylor should win all of those games. If you win all of those games, then you lose the two tough ones to Arizona and Houston. That's fine. You're probably going to be a 8-type seed probably, is what I would guess going into the NCAA tournament, unless they go on a run in the Big 12 tournament. But if they do win those games, then they pull off one of these upsets against Arizona or Houston. Now, all of a sudden, I think you're really kind of giving yourself a chance to potentially move up a couple lines. I mean, winning a game against Arizona or Houston does a lot for you. And that could lead Baylor to being, somewhere around that 7-6 seed line. Now, again, that means that you're taking full advantage of the opportunities in front of you. You're not getting upset by anyone. And then you're pulling off one of those upsets against Arizona and Houston. That's a lot to ask. And I wouldn't fully expect that at this point. But I do expect Baylor to compete. I think probably the best case scenario in my eyes right now is that Baylor kind of finishes this run 5-2 going into Big 12 play, get Big 12 tournament play, which again, that gets you squarely in the tournament, gives you a nice chance to potentially make some noise in the Big 12 tournament.
Yeah, you get to they're 6-3. No. What are they in the conference right now? If they
7-6.
7-6. If they can get to 10-8 or better. Or what would it be 11-9 or something like that? You get above 500 in the Big 12, you're fine. Plus, their strength of schedule is also really, really among the best in the country too. Anything else, guys, for Grayson?
Nope.
Craig? All right, Grayson. Happy Valentine's Day. Thanks for being a part of it, man. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all.
Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'em 365 recruiting analyst, and also covering the men's basketball and also the football team.